We're going to begin with reflections by senators and House lawmakers on both sides of the aisle after former President Trump was acquitted this weekend of inciting the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. With a mostly partisan vote of 57 to 43, Democrats lost their push to hold Donald Trump accountable for the riot on January 6th. A triumphant Trump released a statement soon after promising a, quote, vision for a bright, radiant, and limitless American future. Congress now turns its focus to the $1.9 trillion proposal COVID relief plan. So Debra Alfarone is in Washington with more. Debra, what can you tell us?
I can tell you, Anne-Marie, that there are not that many senators around here this week because, well, it's President's Day. But when they get back, the focus is going to be on the coronavirus pandemic, and it's also going to be on the economy. Now, we've heard from the White House, and they say that President Biden, once they kind of get through that, he's going to take part in a televised town hall this week. He's also going to tour a vaccine production facility.
House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin says his team did all it could in former President Trump's Senate trial.
We successfully prosecuted him and convicted him in the court of public opinion and in the court of history. He's obviously a major political problem for the Republican Party, and as long as he's out there attempting to wage war on American constitutional democracy, he's a problem for all of us.
Saturday's 57 to 43 vote fell short of the two-thirds majority needed to convict the former president. The 7 Republicans who joined Democrats to vote guilty are now facing a backlash. The Louisiana Republican Party Executive Committee voted to censure Senator Bill Cassidy.
He brought together a crowd, but a portion of that was transformed into a mob. And when they went into the Capitol, it was clear that he wished that lawmakers be intimidated. And even after he knew there was violence taking place, he continued to basically sanction the mob being there.
With the trial now history, lawmakers plan to tackle COVID relief once they return here to the Capitol from recess.
President Biden has said he is willing to compromise on who gets $1,400 stimulus checks based on income, but he may have to separately pursue a $15 minimum wage in stages. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders wants the hike included.
We've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour. That's what the American people want, and that's what I intend to do.
House Democrats are working to push through President Biden's nearly $2 trillion plan, while some Republicans want to cut the cost by about 2/3.
And there is definitely more fallout for Republican senators who voted to convict Mr. Trump. Now, the only thing that might have stopped Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska from being censured is really the sub-zero temperatures and the high winds that ended up canceling a weekend meeting. Anne-Marie.
So the acquittal may not exactly be the final word on the insurrection at the Capitol. There are growing calls among lawmakers to create a bipartisan commission to really investigate the Capitol riots on January 6th, similar to the one created after 9/11. Could this commission provide, I don't know, any accountability for the day's events, and how soon could we see it start?
Well, Anne-Marie, it could potentially provide some accountability because they could be looking into new facts and new details, and that could end up changing the game, so to speak. So, yeah, a 9/11 type commission, a bipartisan type of panel that's not guided by politics is exactly what Nancy Pelosi has already asked for. Now, more people are getting on board. So we've got Democratic Senator Chris Coons saying he believes that there's grounds for civil and criminal litigation against Mr. Trump. We also have a House impeachment manager, Madeline Dean, calling for it. Senator Lindsey Graham says that he thinks there should be a commission, but probably not for the same reasons that other people say so. And even the people who had headed up the actual 9/11 commission say this sounds like a good idea. Now, as far as when, well, we're in recess this week, so we'll have to see about next week. But right now, it's definitely, the call for it is growing.
Interesting. Debra, thank you so much. All right, so we want to bring in Kim Wehle now for some legal perspective on the trial. She's a law professor at the University of Baltimore and the author of the book, How to Read the Constitution and Why. So thank you so much for joining us. So we heard in Debra's piece just before you that the impeachment managers say they did everything they could in the trial. I want to ask you, what your opinion is on that. Some people felt that they should have pushed for actual witness testimony. Did they do everything they could, do you think?
I think they proved their case for sure. It was a stellar sort of weaving together of the facts, Mr. Trump's actions in real time or lack of action in real time, and sort of the emotional trauma of it. There were moments that were moving, I think, for anyone who watched it. But I do think that they should have called some witnesses for a number of reasons. One is it's impossible to sort of rule out that minds would have been changed. I think it's highly unlikely, but if you actually put people on the stand that Americans can watch, they might have seen it in a different way. And the second piece really is to legitimize impeachment itself. I think it is now, with two failed impeachments, I think they have accomplished some things, as Jamie Raskin indicated. But I think most Americans, or many Americans, see it almost like a political theater and not a serious level of presidential accountability. But there are a lot of headaches that pushing for witnesses would have taken. But I would have liked to see not just the House impeachment managers. I'm sure there's political pressure from behind, but I'd like to see Democrats sort of stand up further for this narrative and the rule of law, because it's deeply, deeply troubling, and it remains so.
So Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell spoke, and if you only tuned into one portion of his speech, you might have thought that he voted to convict, but he didn't. I want to play some of his sound, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
So there you have Mitch McConnell actually kind of putting forth a pretty interesting argument when it comes to convicting. He ultimately decided that it wasn't in the Senate's purview to be impeaching a former president, and that's the reason why he voted to acquit. That being said, he does present a very interesting argument. Could the former president perhaps face criminal charges linked to what happened on January 6th?
Well, a couple things. One is Mitch McConnell's sort of summary there shows that the House impeachment managers did prove the basic facts. I mean, if Mitch McConnell laid it out that way, he was persuaded. It was really, honestly, Anne-Marie, a little odd that not just Mitch McConnell, but also defense counsel for the president were saying, listen, as a constitutional matter, it's not impeachment that is to decide the conduct going forward of a president, what's proper, what's not, but it's the criminal justice system that you can go and prosecute this man. Two different things. Jamie Raskin was saying, listen, we're just talking about drawing a line in the sand for the job description of presidents. We're not putting anybody in jail. And they kind of hung him out to dry a little bit in the criminal justice system. We'd have to see if they'd stick by that. I think there's a strong chance we will see indictments for a number of reasons. One is that arguably he was an accessory, Donald Trump, to, or if not a conspirator, to the violence that happened that day that is putting over 100 people, maybe more than that at this point, in the criminal justice system. The rioters we're seeing now on the screen, some of those people will lose their liberty. And they're saying in their papers across the country that, listen, we went because of Donald Trump. That's why we were there. We were following our call to duty, what we thought was what the Constitution required. The second thing, of course, we've got an investigation now going on in Georgia, on tape, Donald Trump asking to find votes. Many prosecutors believe, that was a conversation with Georgia Secretary of State, that's a per se obvious request to engage in an election fraud. That would be a crime. And then there are ongoing investigations out of the state of New York relating to potential financial crimes that precede Donald Trump's presidency.
So listen, just as we thought perhaps our national lesson on constitutional law was wrapping up, something else. Democrats have floated the idea of using the 14th Amendment to bar Mr. Trump from holding office in the future. Can you explain to our viewers how that would work, and is it likely?
Sure. So I did a piece for this actually in Politico that it lays everything out. That part of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, was passed after the Civil War. So remember, this was Reconstruction. There were a lot of Confederate soldiers and officers roaming around. And the framers of the 14th Amendment didn't want former Confederate soldiers who had rebelled against the Union to become part of the new government. And so they passed this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that said, listen, if you engaged in a rebellion, you can't hold public office. The problem with it is, generally, Anne-Marie, in order to actually go to court and enforce the Constitution, Congress usually has to pass a separate statute that's called cause of action statute or jurisdictional statute. There is a statute out there that was passed around the same time in the 1870s that allows prosecutors to charge a misdemeanor against someone who runs for office when they were guilty of insurrection. And of course, back right after the Civil War, it was really clear to establish as a matter of fact whether someone was or was not an insurrectionist. Today, a little trickier. Two ways Congress could enforce it. One, I think the talk we're seeing now is for them to actually issue a censure, a statement that the 14th Amendment was violated by Donald Trump. The question then would become, is that enforceable? How do you put that into action in the future if you were on a ballot? That's where I've suggested Congress, in addition, pass a cause of action, a statute that says, listen, a competing candidate could challenge and try to get an injunction to kick him off the ballot. All of that is unclear. I think if Congress did pass that statute, there'd be some constitutional challenges to that. They might be worthwhile. They might actually carry the day, but at least we'd have some mechanism through Congress and the courts, because just pursuing Donald Trump as a criminal matter doesn't clean up the mess that essentially the House or the Senate Republicans left for the U.S. Congress. That is, we're out of the business of basically taking care of insurrections towards the end of a term, prompted by the president of the United States, that end in bloodshed and death. Because, you know, the Republicans, Mitch McConnell himself, the reason that he didn't actually vote to convict, at least allegedly, was, well, it was after the fact. It was, he's no longer in office, therefore we don't have the ability to hold a trial. That's never going to change. So any insurrection around a peaceful transition of power, it basically is fair game for future presidents. Congress is out of the business of regulating that, according to the Senate Republicans this weekend.
Right. Kim Wehle, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.